Okay, welcome. Just about ready to go. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhasa. Okay, welcome everyone to this Dhamma talk. Last week, I gave an introduction to the Four Noble Truths and set the context. And my plan for this evening is to discuss the first noble truth, the truth of dukkha, uh, the truth of dukkha or suffering. Uh, so, first of all, let's uh, clarify a bit what the word dukkha actually means. The standard translation is suffering, and many people have pointed out that that's not quite adequate. There is no real one English word that completely covers the concept. In this context of the Four Noble Truths, uh, suffering comes actually pretty close because that is what the Buddha is emphasizing here. The problem with existence in samsara, the fact that it is inevitably tinged with suffering. But dukkha is really more broad than that because for two reasons suffering is not adequate. The first reason is the word suffering is not broad enough. uh, Dukkha applies to all conditioned phenomena, and it doesn't take much reflection to realize that in um, human experience not everything is suffering. There certainly is enough suffering to go around, but we also experience moments of happiness and pleasure, and many moments of neutral feeling of neither happiness nor suffering. But these are all encapsulated with dukkha. In one clarification of that is to divide dukkha into three types. There's dukkha dukkhata, which means something like dukkha per se or dukkha as such, which is simple, straightforward suffering. If you step on a stone with your bare foot and hurt your foot, then that's painful sensation. That's not complicated to understand. That's dukkha, that's suffering, that's dukkha dukkhata. So that's the type of dukkha associated with unpleasant feeling. Then there's a dukkha viparinama, which means the dukkha of changeableness. And this is the type of dukkha that's associated with pleasant feeling, because any pleasurable sensation is impermanent. And it's also, besides being impermanent, any pleasurable feeling or object, any desirable object is going to be imperfect and not fully satisfying. It's impossible to satisfy the craving of the mind with samsaric objects. There's one Tibetan text I looked at that made an interesting argument. It said that if there were one object anywhere in the universe that was fully satisfying, then the entire universe would have ceased to exist long ago, because all consciousness would settle onto that object sooner or later, eventually, and cease to move. um, the third type of dukkha is dukkha sankhata, dukkha as a characteristic, or the conditioned nature of dukkha, which applies to all the feelings, but pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. But it's especially associated with neutral feeling because it's the only neutral feeling doesn't have either of the other two kinds. So dukkha sankhata is the inherent dukkha of all phenomena. So dukkha is universal, and but suffering is not universal. What is universal is the aspect of dukkha as imperfection, as incompleteness, as being unable to satisfy. So the objects that exist in samsara are inherently broken. So this kind of leads into the second problem with the word dukkha being translated as suffering, because suffering is a subjective phenomena. It's a feeling or a emotional state engendered in the um, the viewer or uh, the experiencer of the object. So it's entirely subjective. But dukkha is meant to be also and actually primarily objective. It exists inherently in the objects. To return to the example of stepping on a sharp stone with your bare foot, you as a sentient being feel the subjective quality of suffering, but the stone, we can't say that the stone itself suffers. It is, but the stone is imbued with dukkha because it's a conditioned phenomena. So we have to be careful with translating dukkha as suffering. One problem that comes up because of this translation is that people get the people outside of Buddhism, or having a very superficial knowledge of Buddhism, let's say, have the impression that it's a pessimistic or gloomy religion because it is talking about suffering so much. I was asked this question once in a public talk. Someone asked me, why do you Buddhists talk about suffering so much? And I couldn't resist a kind of a flippant answer at first. I said, that's not true. We don't just talk about suffering. We also talk about pain, grief, lamentation, and despair. But the more serious answer is that Buddhism is not pessimistic or gloomy. It's realist. It's realistic. It wants to have you confront the reality of conditioned existence and not try to pretend that it's all sweetness and light, that there is suffering, there is imperfection inherent in conditioned phenomena. I also recall reading once in a little book by Alan Watts, who was a I guess probably most of you have heard of Alan Watts, but he was a prominent popularizer of Buddhist ideas in the 1960s, and his background was mostly in Zen tradition. And in this little book, he spent a few pages criticizing Theravada as being life denying and negative, and inculcating a kind of negative view of everything. But then he had to add in a footnote. He had to own up and be honest, and he owned up in a footnote and saying that this may be true on a theoretical level, but I have personally traveled extensively in Southeast Asia, and I've never met such happy people. So I think we can dismiss the idea that the Buddha's intention is pessimistic, and we'll see that when we get to the third noble truth, we'll see that there's he does provide a solution. But here in the first truth, laying out the first truth, the truth of dukkha, he's not giving the solution yet. He's merely stating the problem. He's saying there is dukkha, and he defines it here. Uh, and I'll read it so I don't miss a clause. He defines it right in this first sermon, and this formula is repeated elsewhere many times. What is dukkha? Birth is dukkha. Aging is dukkha. Death is dukkha. Grief, lamentation, pain, sorrow, and despair are dukkha. Association with the disliked is dukkha. Separation from the liked is dukkha. Not to get what one wants is dukkha. In brief, clinging to the five khandhas is dukkha. So he begins the definition with the existential dilemma, which is really the crux of the matter. Birth, aging, and death. Sometimes sickness is added in: birth, sickness, aging, and death. This is the condition of all sentient beings, and particularly as this sutta is addressed to human beings. This is our situation as humans. We're born and we age and we're prone to sickness, and eventually we die. And there's no variation in that. Birth, aging, and death is a universal lot of all conscious or sentient beings, and particularly human beings. Birth is seen in the Buddhist tradition as being the great calamity, because by coming into manifestation, by being born, that means you haven't, in your previous lifetime, you haven't completed the task. You haven't become an arahant, so you have to go through this miserable round one more time. In Western tradition, there's often the image or the presentation of the existence of a fetus in the womb as being a blissful experience. Some of the Western psychological models are based on this, that the separation from the mother at birth is a huge trauma, because the existence in the womb was felt as a blissful, peaceful state. This is not the way the old Buddhists looked at it. If you read the Visuddhimagga's description of the existence of an embryo in the womb, is described as being very miserable, dark, hot, cramped, subject to all kinds of strange noises and bumps and bangs as the mother moves around. If the mother eats hot chilies, the baby feels like it's burning up, and so on. So the condition of the being was seen as suffering right from the very beginning. We should also add here a point of some peripheral importance, that when we talk about birth, jati, in most contexts, it actually means conception. That this is the beginning of a new consciousness continuum, is at the moment of conception. This is even in the when ages of people are given in the Pali Canon, we should always subtract 1 year to understand it in modern terms, because they generally counted the person's age from conception. So, for example, in the Vinaya, it says that to be ordained as a bhikkhu, one must be 20 years old. That actually means 19 years old. That's 20 years from conception. So Um, Having come into existence, jati, birth, coming into some form, and we're mostly considering human form here. Uh, One is subject to all the ailments of the body. There's sickness. Very few people escape any kinds of sickness, and if you live, if you don't die prematurely, then you will experience aging. That's inevitable. The As soon as the body stops growing, it begins declining, and this process gathers momentum as the years and decades pass, and the aging, the failing of the faculties, the stiffening of the limbs, the wrinkling of the skin, etc., is a universal phenomena, unless one dies before that. And then finally, death is inevitable for all human beings, and um, uh, this is the ending of a life continuum, but it's not the ending of dukkha, because then if the person dies unenlightened, if the person dies not being an arahant, they're still craving and karma outstanding, then the consciousness must arise somewhere else by a law of nature, dhammata, and rebirth occurs, and the whole thing starts again. So this is birth and death are seen by many philosophies as the issue, that is the fundamental existential crisis. We're conscious sentient beings caught between birth and death. In the version of Buddhism, this is compounded by repetition. It's not just birth and death, but it's birth and death again and again and again. So the Buddha in Samyutta Nikaya, there's a series of short suttas where the Buddha emphasizes the endless suffering in samsara. If you could pile up all the skulls from your previous lives in which your head was cut off, that would make a mountain larger than the Himalayas. If you could collect all the tears you shed throughout your countless lives for the loss of loved ones, that would be a body of water greater than the ocean, and so on. There's several of these suttas with these graphic illustrations, and at the end of each sutta, the Buddha says, "Enough, enough, alang, alang." How long do you wish to keep filling the cemeteries? Make an end. This is enough. You've done it. You should be, if you could just understand that, of how long you've been wandering in samsara and how pointless it is, you would have an urgent need to make an end. Enough. Alang, alang. So birth and death, and then the sequence: grief, lamentation, pain, sorrow, and despair, all obvious aspects of suffering. Here talking about the subjective side of suffering, the emotional distress of suffering. Association with the disliked and separation from the liked. That's kind of obvious too. This is a great deal of our experience of suffering in the world comes in this way, that we are separated from that which we like or love, including our loved ones, our relationships. People die or move away or become estranged, and then there's suffering. We're also forced to associate with that which is disliked. Maybe you have conditions where you live of being too noisy or being too crowded, or there's many things that impinge on our consciousness, often on a daily basis, that we don't like, and we're forced to associate with them. Not to get what one likes is dukkha, frustrated craving. And finally, the last clause is clinging to the five aggregates is dukkha. And the Pali here is one long compound, um, pachupanad, pachupadana kanda, panchupadana kanda, five uh, clung to aggregates. And sometimes it's translated that way, the five clung to aggregates. Upadana is one of these stages in the dependent origination. It comes after craving. And its standard translation is clinging, and that's actually not bad, but a more literal translation would actually be fuel, the fuel for becoming. It's the energy arising out of craving that causes us to come into being. Craving itself, and we'll talk about craving more next week, but craving, tanha, is a pretty raw impulse, just wanting something. With upadana, it becomes more complex. It becomes something of a project of acquiring the object. And as part of that, there is established a relationship of self and other. And this is where self really starts to be formed. And then bhava, one comes into being. So here we're talking about suffering as the five clung to aggregates, or clinging to the five aggregates. And this can be interpreted in a couple of ways. If we look at upadana as meaning clinging to, if we put the emphasis there, we can understand this as meaning that the act of clinging to the aggregates is suffering. But if we take upadana as, which is probably more grammatically correct, to take it as a kind of a participle, meaning like clung to, the aggregates that are clung to, or the aggregates that are fuel for becoming, then the emphasis is on the aggregates themselves, the five khandha, that's body, consciousness, feelings, perception, mental formations, that these themselves are a source of suffering. So this can be then taken as a statement of the universality of dukkha, because the five khandha is all we experience. So dukkha is inherent in our being. So this is the definition given by the Buddha for dukkha in this context of the Noble Truth. And the emphasis here is on the subjective side, because we're looking at the problem or the dilemma of existence in samsara. And conditioned existence is inherently going to entail suffering. And it is inherently dukkha, and even when it's not suffering, it's still dukkha, because it's inherently imperfect and flawed and provisional in nature. And as I mentioned last week, the Buddha told us that we should make an effort to understand the First Noble Truth, parijanati, which means to fully comprehend, fully understand, to grasp with the intellect or mind. So we're dealing with the First Noble Truth. We're dealing with entirely with conditioned existence. We're dealing entirely with samsara. And it is within our capacity as rational beings to understand the nature of samsaric existence. And it's incumbent on us to do so, which means not just a mere intellectual or theoretical understanding, but actually to develop wisdom by penetration of reality. Now, this is vipassana, to see things clearly in their own nature as they actually are, and not color things with how we wish they would be or how we think they ought to be, but to look at them as they actually are. And when we do that, we see birth, sickness, old age, death, pain, lamentation, grief, and despair, and all the rest of it. So, uh, just to sum up in this first noble truth, this is the Buddha laying out the problem. This is our condition within samsara, and it's the foundation stone of what follows. So we'll stop there for today, and I'll now turn to the chat and see what we have. It looks like there's a whole bunch of stuff already in the chat. Let's see what we got here. I am on a holiday and have become ill. How can I stay positive around family? Now, family is sometimes difficult if uh, people say you choose your friends, you don't choose your family, and that's actually not entirely true, because you were born into that family because of your karma. You've got some association with these people. It's the reason you were born there. One thing that makes I think that can be problematic in relating to family for adults is you might be separated with them for some time, and then you come back together, and in your emotional base, no time has passed, and you sort of pick it up where you left off, and it becomes that becomes a kind of a delusion inducing filter. Instead of seeing and relating to the person honestly, directly as they are at this moment, you still have all this old baggage. Try and make an effort to drop all old baggage and relate to the person in the here and now. And you may find that if you do that, your relations will become more positive and more clear. What I enjoy about the Buddhist teaching on dukkha is it reduces powerful people, devas, and gods to nothing, because they're all subject to dukkha, the same situation as us. Yes, even the devas and brahmas are subject to dukkha. Their dukkha is harder to see, but they still have dukkha. That's why the human condition is considered to be the ideal condition for attainment of enlightenment, because we have a balance here of pleasure and pain, or ease, not pleasure so much as ease and space, and enough suffering as a goal that we can see there is a problem, but enough ease that and space that we can do something about it. It's hard for the devas to understand and see dukkha, because it's not so evident for them, but it still exists. I've heard Mahayana practitioners mention dedication and merit a lot. What are their functions and roles in Theravada and Thai forest tradition? We also practice dedication and merit. There is a Paritha chant that's often done, which is dedicating the merit of one's practice to all classes of beings. And the practice of dedicating merit for uh, our relatives in the ghost realm is a very commonly done practice. That when we do it's the way to take care of the dead. Is when you do any meritorious act, you make a gift or do a kindness, then you can mentally dedicate that merit to your relatives in the ghost realm. And the questions asked sometimes, well, what if I don't have any relatives in the ghost realm? And the answer is Even if you don't have any from this lifetime, you're bound to have some there from the beginningless samsara. Let's see, next question. While meditating, I have come to the state where I realize or know that I am disconnected from everything physically, emotionally. And it's like going deeper and deeper inward, but into a void and knowing emptiness of things directly. Is that the base of nothingness, or is it perception or non-perception? Um, it's impossible for me to answer that from without a long discussion with you about what you exactly have experienced. Um, but my superficial reading of what you state here, it sounds more like uh, an insight into emptiness, more of a vipassana kind of a state than a formless abiding. Is the ocean of tears and mountains of skulls meant to be taken literally? It seems impossible math-wise. I don't see why it's impossible when we consider that samsara is said to be without beginning, literally infinite time span. So there's been plenty of time to pile up the skulls. Now, why do I feel bad after many hours of meditation? I feel good immediately, but if I meditate again, sitting or continue with walking meditation for too long, the feeling of fear and depression arises. Um, I would say that you have to be doing something a little wrong, a little off with your practice if it's making you feel particularly fear. It shouldn't arouse fear and depression. Um, you might try a different style of meditation. I don't know what you're doing, but you might try doing Brahma Viharas, for example, to brighten the consciousness. Um, next one is Samvega a resultant karma? Can a genuine bid for nibbana occur without being preceded by it? Can it arise more than once in a lifetime? I would say that technically it probably is. Samvega, for those who don't know, is like a religious aspiration or an awe or a feeling of dedication or urgency, a feeling of urgency in the practice. Um, and I would say it is basically a resultant, but you can encourage it. You can you should be arousing samvega, and that's the purpose of suttas like the one about the mountains of skulls, is to arouse this samvega and also nibbida, the kind of uh, weariness of samsara, the the strong desire to end conditioned existence, or to find a way out of conditioned existence. And it is necessary because our addiction to samsara is so deep. We really have to cultivate these states like samvega and nibbida to make a break from it. And can it arise more than once in a lifetime? Yeah, it can arise many times. It can arise several times in a day. It's not. It shouldn't be something rare and unusual. It is said an arahant will know he's fully enlightened. How does he know? Is it a single moment of realization, or does it take time to know you've reached full enlightenment? Well, the experience of each of the four stages, from stream winner to arahant, is on the one hand, it's a momentary occurrence. There's a definite quantum leap, a definite shift that occurs in a single moment. Or actually, technically, it's a pair of mind moments, bang, bang, but it's still like very brief. And that's the actual emergence into that state of being. But then the results of it unfold over time. So there is an aspect there's an aspect that's instantaneous, and there's an aspect that takes some time to unfold. What is the right way to treat small beings on the ground and firewood in the body, etc.? The Buddha apparently did not approve extreme caution of the Jains. I think we did this question last time, or maybe that was when the stream cut out. Um, but yeah, the basic idea in Buddhism is that bad karma is made only if an act is done intentionally and deliberately and knowingly. So if you trotting on ants as you walk down the street, you're not aware of it, you're not making bad karma. You don't have to go to extreme lengths to try and avoid that. You just take a reasonable precaution. I have heard Brahma Sahampati is Mahabrahma. Again, this was last week, but probably people missed it. Um, uh, there is a controversy over whether Brahma Sahampati is Mahabrahma of this world system, or whether, as the questioner suggests, an Anagami from Sudawasa. There's a case to be made from the different texts that both ways. In my book on cosmology, I've actually have a page or two devoted to this question, and I don't really have a ultimate solution to it. I tend to lean to the idea that he is a Mahabrahma, but there's a case to be made for him being an Anagami as well. Next one. I have a question about Avicii hell. In one sutta, it says beings are incurable and in agony. What does incurable mean? It means there's no end to their suffering while they're in Avicii. This is the name Avicii means without respite, with no break. It's considered to be the very lowest, the worst condition in all of samsara is Avicii hell, and there is it's continuous suffering with no mind moments of respite but it's not eternal. There's no eternal damnation in Buddhism. The karma runs out, the being is reborn elsewhere. But while he's in Avicii, he's incurable in the sense that there's nothing he can do or can be done to relieve his suffering. Okay, next one. Let's say there is sugar and someone tastes the sugar, but because the Buddha taught there's no self, there's no taster, only the process of tasting. Yes, am I getting Anata right? Yes, that's how we would say it. If a doctor, the same questioner goes on, if a doctor says that a person is not going to make it in the ICU and orders the dosage of medicine to be reduced so the patient dies, is that a bad karma for the doctor and nurse? Reducing the dosage of the person who will die when life support is off. This is a kind of difficult question to answer definitively. The general view of Buddhism is that euthanasia is wrong. It's always killing someone is always wrong, a deliberate killing. But one is not. On the other hand, one is not required to artificially prolong life. So it's not considered an act of killing if you see a person as incurable. You just let them die naturally. You don't try and hook them up to machines and keep them alive in a vegetative state. There's no requirement to do that. But any action taken to shorten the life is a killing, and it's wrong. That's becoming, I will say peripherally, that's becoming a serious problem here in Canada. They're really pushing euthanasia here, and in part to save money for the healthcare system, I think. Next question. How intensive of a practice does it take to attain stream entry, and how long does it take people? That's impossible to answer how long it takes, because it varies for every individual. It depends on your paramis and your whatever work you might have done in past lives, how ready you are for it. Some people come into existence as having almost completed the task in the previous lifetime, and they just very easily, quickly attain stream entry. Other people, they're just beginning the process, that it might take them more than one lifetime. Um, it does take dedication, and I would say that the key is really two things: faith and relinquishment. Next question. In Majima 135, the shorter analysis of deeds says when a being hurts other beings, they are reborn sick and short lived. Does that mean Rahula was unskillful in his previous life? Was it because he was a Dewa in his previous life and couldn't completely fit in a human body, as you said in previous weeks? Well, we don't know. I would suspect that Rahula must have had previous lifetimes. He must have made good karma to be reborn as the son of Siddhartha Gautama. So, but in many previous lifetimes, as we all do, even um, Moggallana, he ended his life by violence. He was killed by bandits because he had done evil deeds in one previous lifetime. I see a lot of Buddhists give food to the Buddha statue, saying it will reach Buddha. Is this true, or is it a form of Silabata Paramasa? Well, it's a ritual that's particularly in Sri Lanka. They do Buddha puja. They offer food when they make a meal offering. They'll also offer some to the Buddha Rupa. It's if you actually believe it's reaching the Buddha, then it would be a wrong view. It would be Silabata Paramasa, as you say. It's a ritual, false belief in rituals. But as a simple gesture of respect and faith, it's harmless. It's actually positive to the spirit of the practitioner to do that, to dedicate to the Buddha. But if you actually believe that the Buddha is getting that food, then you're seriously misunderstanding the teachings. Why is tickling banned in the Vinaya? Was there an incident that led to that rule? There was. There were these. There were these. I can't remember now if it's 4 or 5. The gang of 5. I think it was. There was. No, gang was gang of 6, I believe. But anyways, there was a group of monks who were responsible for many of the minor rules because they were very ill behaved and they were always kind of playing pranks on. And one time they caught a novice and held him down and tickled him, and he became so excited with the tickling and that he actually had a heart attack and died. So the Buddha said, no, don't do that anymore. That's inappropriate. Does the fact that all beings only experience suffering caused by their own karma and ignorance mean that nothing wrong or unfair is actually happening in samsara? That question is kind of wrongly based on a wrong understanding of it's like wrongly phrased because karma has nothing to do with fairness or right or wrong. It's a natural law. It's not a judgment. It's not like it doesn't. It is in a very abstract sense. It's ultimately absolutely fair, but it's not. It's not like it's trying to be fair. So there's no sense of like a judgment being meted out. It's just a natural law that when one does wrong things, one will receive painful results, and vice versa. When one does good things, one will receive pleasant results. And you should try and avoid thinking about it in those kind of legalistic or moralistic terms. Think of it as a natural law, an unfoldment. Okay, next one. In Dutta Gamani's story, a monk said he only killed 1.5 people because others not taking 3 refuges and precepts. Do any Buddhist historical uses to justify violence on non-Buddhists? Yeah, that's a very troublesome text. If anybody is not familiar with that, he's talking about the Sri Lankan Chronicle. It's a medieval chronicle written in Pali, and Dutta Gamani was a king of Sri Lanka, and he's a great national hero because he led the movement or the rebellion that freed the Sri Lankan nation from um, foreign domination when the Tamils from southern India had taken over Sri Lanka for many years. He drove them out, but he was leading an army and fighting war to do so. And on his deathbed, according to the chronicle, he asked a monk, he was feeling guilty because of all the people he killed in the war, and the monk said it doesn't. Basically, what the monk said was that it doesn't count because they didn't take the precepts and refuges. So this is completely contrary to actual Buddhist teachings. That killing even an ant or a flea is killing. Certainly, killing human beings. It doesn't matter if they're Buddhist or not. And has it historically been used to justify violence? It that I don't know if that particular passage is cited so often, but there have been from time to time, abuses of the religion, just like any other religion, where Buddhists feel that they're defending the Dharma by killing non-Buddhists. It's not. I would say, we have to be honest and admit that this has happened, but I would say that it's not. It is definitely perceived by most Buddhists and most of the time as being wrong, and there hasn't been there hasn't been a general or long-standing promotion of holy wars and so on, as we see in some other religions. It's an aberration when it occurs in Buddhism. Okay, we'll maybe we'll take a couple more and wind it down. If artificial wombs in the future can remove the trauma of birth, will they remember their past lives? I don't know. I very much doubt that such a thing is possible. Maybe I'm a bit of a Luddite. I think things like that kind of horrify me, the idea of artificial wombs. I don't tend to believe that it's even possible. I recently read Samvega being translated as profound sobriety, spiritual sadness, sober sadness. Yeah, I could see that as definitely that those translations are a kind of an aspect of Samvega, but I don't like the emphasis on sadness. It's more of an urgency, like that phrase that Buddha uses. How long will you fill the cemeteries? Alang, alang. I guess the Pali is translated enough, but alang is very strong. It's like be done with it, make an end. Okay. What is the origin of the name Siddhartha? I can't find it in the discourses. Yeah, I don't think it's ever really explained. Could see the breakdown of might be like Siddhi is one who has power, and arta is like duty. I don't know if that's actually the etymology or not. I recently heard the conflicting views that everything is karma and not everything is karma. What is your opinion? Um, well, everything the orthodox view, as we find in the Abhidhamma, is that everything which we experience has as one component past karma, but that we do have freedom of action, so we can. Our intention is ultimately free, and we can make our own fresh karma. And when I say that one component, because it is to be understood that nothing arises from a single cause, that karma is a contributing factor to everything we experience, but it's not the only factor. Is it recommended to meditate when you wake up or at night? It's recommended to meditate anytime you want. That would be a useful time. Is there any Vinaya rule to not let 60 or 70-year-olds be ordained? No, there's no Vinaya rule, but there's no upper age limit, but many traditions will not ordain older people because they're problematic. Okay, let's. Okay, there's. I'll take these last three questions that are already here. I won't take any additional ones. Would the Buddha say the feeling of suffering can be considered a defilement or a hindrance? No, it's a resultant. The feeling of suffering is a purely resultant. It's your reaction to it that could be a defilement or hindrance. Weren't the Sarvastivada also right in the end, as Einstein's general relativity of 4D spacetime shows that past, present, future all exist in a real sense? Yeah, that has occurred to me too. That it's the Sarvastivada view is kind of Einsteinian. Would antinatalism work to stop samsara? No. No, it would just make it worse, because of beings not being born as human would end up being born as animals or something. It's a horrible philosophy, antinatalism. Okay, I'll end the stream there, and next week we'll deal with the second noble truth, which is the truth of the origin of suffering in Tanha. Okay, thank you all for coming, and we'll see you again.